Hi everyone, you've tuned into Anime Huddle, coming straight from Radio LUMS, and this is your RJ Namrah speaking. Welcome back to another episode with us, and our anime of the episode this time is a hidden gem of the slice of life genre, Wonder Egg Priority. So Wonder Egg Priority was produced by the studio Cloverworks in 2021, and like most people who initially started watching this show, you might be under the impression that this is just another colorful slice of life type series you can peacefully let play in the background. But as anyone who stuck through the first couple of episodes can attest to, the aesthetic of the show, in which these very bright visuals screaming at you from every angle, from the character design to the landscape, completely contrasts with the very serious subjects at the core of the series. At its simplest, the series involves around 4 teenage girls, Ai, Rika, Neru, and Momo, each of whom have had a friend close to them die. In this state of grief, the 4 girls discover a mysterious dream world. Within it live 2 puppets which provide the girls with wonder eggs containing other girls who have also died in a similar fashion as their friends did. When hatched, these girls materialize, and the 4 protagonists must protect themselves from monsters that are the physical manifestation of their trauma. And if they protect enough wonder eggs, they'll be able to bring back their friends. So their goal is basically to escort a troubled soul in limbo, since its body died in a self-inflicted manner. While going through the process of reviving their friends, all 4 girls cross paths, both in the dream world and in real life. And that is when the show gets going for us, because we all love that it's as simple as it can get in the magical premise, but has got some really solid emotional aspects to it that the characters bring out through their interaction with each other. The show itself is not as well known as the other anime we've mentioned so far. It's not exactly niche, but it did comfortably well, and is mostly just your friendly slice of life anime that is more unique than most, since it's got a balanced mix of dark and light topics. So having talked about the background of the anime, we're going to delve a bit into the actual characters themselves, along with the heavy themes portrayed, and wrap it up by talking about where the anime really went in our world. That is, did it make a difference? Did it offer a uniquely covered but relatable perspective into adolescence? So, if we try to dissect the characters in Wonder Egg Priority, we immediately notice something unique about them. With the exception of the slice of life genre, it's not often in anime that you see characters occupying the real world. We often see individuals with incredible abilities living in these fantastical worlds. It's the stuff of your dreams. And while Wonder Egg Priority does have its fair share of fantasy elements, they're rooted in reality, and that provides these characters with a base level of relatability. And that base level of relatability is really all you need to play on the emotions of your audience by bringing up very close-to-heart issues in these characters, but letting them have the power to do what you can only dream about, like suddenly being able to actually enter your dreams with the possibility of what you're searching for in them actually materializing. It's a very common escapist trick, but it works. At the end of the day, we all want to be able to drastically change our lives or alter what had happened in the past. And that is exactly what we see in our 4 protagonists. Take Ai, the character who the anime is centered around. Bullied in school due to her heterochromia, Ai had a difficult time making friends. So when she becomes friends with Koito, a transfer student and another outcast, she becomes very attached to her. Eventually, Koito dies in a self-inflicted way, but no one knows what the reason for her death actually occurring was. And so Ai was completely blindsided and retreated back into her shell, becoming a total social recluse and not going to school at all. All of this is not told to us in a linear manner. Instead, we're introduced to Ai when she already is a shut-in, and we have to piece together her backstory throughout the course of the series. Because this information has to be gathered from the show rather than just being told to us, people have interpreted Ai's situation in different ways. And while everyone has their own assumptions about Ai's story, there isn't a clear-cut answer, since Ai herself becomes confused about events that happened in her own life. For instance, we know that Ai really treasured her friendship with Koito, and saw it as a deep mutual connection between the 2 of them, but we also see fragments of doubt showing in her memories, as she recollects what she remembers about their friendship. The question is, did Koito and Ai have a real connection as friends, or did they seek each other's company as a way to survive the bullying in school, since they saw a common pain in each other? You might wonder whether going back to this egg world and fighting hordes of monsters to bring back her friend was good for Ai's well-being, especially keeping in mind she's meant to be a teenage girl at the end of the day, not some prophesized hero like Naruto. Every monster she fought brought her closer to Koito, but it also placed an intense physical and mental strain on Ai. And given the vague nature of the egg world, there was no guarantee whether Koido could even be brought back. Throughout the series, it feels as though holding on to this desire to bring back her friend is causing more harm than good. It's only when Ai meets the other 3 girls that we see her begin to gain some clarity into herself and her life. Seeing that she isn't alone and that there are others like her, she seeks out their company. But rather than just throwing a pity party with them and calling it a day, Ai attempts to make a real connection with them and creating real bonds with the other 3 protagonists. There's one character who I found particularly interesting, Rika, and that was because of her background as a former idol singer. There are a lot of parallels that we can draw between what insight Rika offered us into this industry and the actual industry today, along with the idolization of celebrities in general, but we're just going to mention some brief things. Firstly, the idea of the parasocial idol relationship. You might have heard of the term parasocial, since it's one of the catchphrases that the internet likes to throw around to sound smart. But in case you don't know, a parasocial relationship is something that's one-sided, in which there's just one person pouring everything they've got, their emotions, money, or time, into another individual, called a persona who doesn't even know they exist. There's a particular way of reinforcing celebrity parasocial relationships, and that's through social media. Take Instagram. You can like or comment on a celebrity's photo, or even private message them. The possibility of that liking and commenting being out there in a medium that the celebrity can see really drives this connection that fans tend to feel. Celebrities themselves overshare on purpose, uploading stories or dropping a documentary every few years with a pity story to make sure they don't lose that intimacy with their fans and make them feel like they're important for listening and supporting them, and that they definitely know exactly what's going on in the celebrity's life. Because for what reason would they lie, right? It definitely can't be to get as much money as they can out of this manufactured relationship, right? Our character, Rika, is a bit different from the celebrities we've personally observed in the sense that she openly acknowledges this dynamic and how she fed off it. One symbol she repeatedly brings up in the show is of the wallet, or more precisely her wallet. In her own words, she uses people as her wallets so that she never has to pay for anything herself. Besides this, she gives a very refreshing take on the Japanese idol industry. Here's a bit of background on one of the core things that started to shape the idol industry in Japan itself, since it's the basis of Rika's character as an idol. It started after the Second World War, when Japanese society was trying to return to normalcy, when the majority of their cities were in ruins, the economic situation in shambles, and major reconstruction work to do in all aspects of life. The spirit of reconstruction was embodied in media as well, for example in TV shows, that would often encapsulate the very overdone motto of one's will to achieve their dreams and never giving up, will always persevere in the end. People will often say that idols are a representation of these values. For starters, their entire business is based around being very inexperienced entertainers at first, which is what they really try to sell, purposefully inexperienced people making basic mistakes, like being out of breath or not even knowing the choreography. That's part of their charm though, what is meant to sell them to the public and why the public just eats that up. Because along with this intentional inexperience, there's a growth arc in which they eventually become performers, better at their work, and therefore able to achieve their dreams and become physical stories of success. In order to sell this story, one thing is very crucial. Being an idol means you must show enthusiasm, bursting energy, and can only display acceptable forms of emotions. And if you do the alternative, they have to come up with a redemption arc. All of this, the very contrived facade that idols have to put up, is something that Rika actively deconstructs with her real personality, which is a total polar opposite from the bubbly, happy-go-lucky girl that she was as a former idol. You might find pessimism in viewing Rika. She's basically meant to be the confirmation that you're deluding yourself if you actually buy into this idol industry, and it's obviously a critique on it. But at the same time, she offers an alternative perspective that peeks through the darker side of the industry. Even though she called her fans her wallets and made fun of who she was as an idol in a way that looked down on her work altogether, we see this wasn't how she always felt. When the anime shows us her backstory, we see her in a different light, as someone who genuinely enjoyed themselves as an idol, singing, dancing, connecting with fans. but it was precisely that which brought her pain. The entire facade of being an idol that preys on the continuation of parasocial relationships and constant masking of real emotions. And all this comes crashing down when she finds out that one of her biggest fans, who would constantly come to her meet and greets, had been stealing in order to have the money to buy her things. And so Rika tells her to not ever come back. And in a scene that was probably the most painful to watch because of how she ripped her fan apart, she made fun of her ruthlessly, thinking that this would be enough to not make her come back, to break the facade. Instead, her fan became depressed and later on took her own life. Rika's not exactly the shallow former celebrity you might think her to be. If she were, she wouldn't go that far to bring her fan back, going into a dream world in which, yes, she's basically immortal because no matter what injury she gets, she's fine. But all of that does materialize when she's back in the real world. We can see in her the reflection of a young girl who was broken by an industry that preyed on her vulnerability, that she wasn't prepared for, and that wasn't compatible with her, since she wanted to be genuine to herself in the end. But in a micro manner, considering the scale of things, she tries to make a difference by going so far to bring that one fan back who was just a wallet to her at some point. Now moving away from the characters a little and delving into the substance of the anime, let's look at some of the most heart-tugging themes in Wonder Egg Priority. It's no surprise that one of the prominent themes in the show is adolescence. Each of the four main characters had a hard time growing up, dealing with these difficulties in which they feel like they don't belong. Momo, for instance, is shown to have insecurities regarding her appearance and how people look at her, coupled with the society's expectations of women to have traditionally feminine appearances. Momo becomes an outcast due to her ambiguous looks. Rika stands at the other end of that spectrum. She's a former child idol used by the entertainment industry because of her appearance. She was groomed to become a star at her own expense. We see her be rude and conceited at times as an outcome of this. Still, we also figure out that these characteristics are deliberate on Rika's part, so she can avoid talking about her feelings and the anger she feels at the industry she was a part of. Overall, the message seems to be that it doesn't matter what a person looks like to you, or how you look like to them. There's no way to really know what someone's going through. And this is especially when you're growing up, feeling out of place because of where you're positioned in society and how society expects you to behave. Another theme in the show is bullying. And whether directly or indirectly, almost everyone in the series has either experienced bullying or taken part in it. Even the girls within the Wonder Eggs are shown to be victims of bullying that initially seemed to be a result of another individual's action. However, we come to realize that while it may only be one person or a small group that's bullying, the underlying factor is the societal norms that are to be preserved. Take the example of Minami Suzuhara, who is one of the Egg Girls. She is shown to be a shy and introverted individual who was bullied and abused by her gymnastics teacher. It's easy to think of that gymnastics teacher as simply being a bully, but within the context of the series, you realize that the instructor is just the avenue through which the expectations for an athlete are thrust onto Minami. She's just a child being told to maintain a slim appearance in order to perform better at gymnastics, continually because of how competitive professional sports are. Children like her are pushed to maintain such extreme standards without any care of their actual well-being. And one of the ways in which the show resolves the tension to these issues is, again, through the physical representation of these traumas or problems in the dream world. So, like the gymnastics teacher who showed up as Minami's trauma that she had to defeat. Keep in mind, the process of defeating isn't the emotional conversation or conflict resolution you might think it is. They have to literally destroy these people in order for the dream cycle to end. So these issues get dealt with in a very grand manner in the show, and there's a lot we could say about that. But let's just bring up a positive here. At the very least, it adds to the charm of Wonder Egg Priority to see these young girls work through their issues in a very heroic way, let's say, and to come the better out of it. One thing about the show is that it was created specifically within the context of Japan. What do we mean by this? Isn't every anime catered to and designed for a mainly Japanese audience? Well, yes, but not many do it in the way that Wonder Egg tried to do. Most anime only use Japan as the setting for the stories, similar to how Hollywood uses the US as their primary setting. What makes Wonder Egg different is that it takes these complex issues of self-inflicted death, bullying, and abuse, and shows them within the parameters of Japanese society. This is not to say that those issues themselves would not exist if not for Japanese society, but rather that the way they do is affected and controlled by society as a whole. All 4 of the main protagonists' dream worlds are unique. It's shaped around their trauma and the trauma of the friends they've lost. For example, for Ai, her dream world is shaped around her school. It's vast and empty. The girls hatching in her dream world all have traumas relating to the school system. The show tells you that all these girls that Ai is trying to save, as well as Koito and Ai herself, are all suffering because of the way schools in Japan are structured. For Momo, it's the structure and rigidity of gender norms. For Rika, it's the manufactured idol industry that demands to be preyed upon and praised in return. For Neru, it's the desire for perfection in every aspect of life. All 4 girls' characters represent a critique of a certain aspect of Japanese society that enables these issues to manifest in the way that they do. But having built up to that, we need to address one of the core themes of the show, which is the idea of going back in time. That's essentially what these girls are doing, and it's framed in a positive and an adventurous light. But this idea of going back in time, is it that great? If you really think about it, it's hard to say whether second chances in life can truly work out. People often say, if I knew then what I know now, I would do things differently. Isn't that a pretty dangerous assumption to lead with, to think you could have changed the course of time? We need to broaden our perspective a bit when we say things like that, because we're leading the assumption that time itself is linear, which it only is in our world, because we've constructed it that way, like our little notes on our Google Calendar on what to do at XYZ time. Human actions are something we can't really predict, as the series explored with Koito's death. Ai constantly expresses that she felt like she never really knew Koito properly, and couldn't understand why she did what she did without at least talking to her. So there's no guarantee that even if Koito came back, Ai would be able to fix that part of their relationship, because again, even with what Ai knows now, it's not going to change Koito's feelings. One final thing we're going to mention is how parents have been presented in this show. We see this anxiety that the characters have in either growing up to become like their parents or not being able to understand them. And that is framed into the wider questioning by the characters of why adults behave the way they do, why there is this big separation between kid and adult. Adult-like actions in which you bury your feelings or put a brave face on, even though the appropriate response would be to scream and cry, makes no sense to these characters. And they talk about this in a little bittersweet, childish way, which is what makes it so endearing to the audience, that they just can't understand why adults are the way they are, and don't ever seem to be able to understand. So coming to the ending of the show, we see a disappointment present here that often ends up in animes that could have been perfect, which is that their ending is just not good. Wonder Egg Priority isn't the exception to this, since its ending only leaves you with a bitter taste in your mouth rather than a sense of resolvement. It's not exactly a creative fault here though, since there were countless production issues going on at the same time as the anime was airing. Anyone that's followed the studio Cloverworks knows that they have a reputation for messing up the conclusion of a series. Recall the travesty of The Promised Neverland Season 2, and how it essentially did a slideshow in the final episode, concluding several arcs in a couple of minutes before ending all of a sudden. Wonder Egg Priority had something similar happen. Reportedly, the animation staff was having difficulty finishing each episode on time. They even had to resort to freelance animators online to help finish certain episodes only hours before their airing slot. The producer of the series even got hospitalized after finishing the final episode. The harsh working conditions of animators are unfortunately the norm in Japan. Had it just been the production and animation that were mismanaged, then it wouldn't have affected the series as a whole once it had fully aired. However, like the previous issues, it seemed that the writing team did not fully flesh out their story and characters beyond the first half of the series. Why do I say this? After around 8 episodes, a 12-episode series should generally be trying to bring its narrative to a close, since that's the standard formula. However, up until the 11th episode, we are told new plot points and details which are bound to complicate the plot and story too much for it to be brought together in 25 minutes. The series that started off as a fantasy turned into science fiction by the end. For example, with the addition of the two puppets of the Wonder Egg Dream World's backstories as scientists. It all felt like the writing team was scrambling at straws to form a coherent structure for a story they hadn't properly planned. The special episode that aired several months later as a consequence of the aforementioned production issues only added to this, revealing Naru as an AI as well as completely turning the majority of the story on its head. It just felt that a series brimming with potential was wasted. So we have to wonder, within this mess of an ending and new universes created within Wonder Egg Priority, who was the show for? Meaning, what was the point of the show? When combined with the previous issues of the show, we realized that perhaps a reason why this last act and conclusion was perceived so negatively by the audience is in part because the writer resorted to depicting the show from his perspective near the end, rather than constructing episodes that resonated with a younger audience, such as the first 2/3 of the show. The latter half almost insults that audience by characterizing girls as emotional individuals that can be driven to dramatic actions simply by a machine. The story changed not just from fantasy to sci-fi. It turned into the writer projecting their own biases and assumptions as an adult man onto teenage girls. Whatever issues that the show previously brought up were firmly rooted in reality, and no, not the age-old societal issues that you might have expected to progress by now, but harsh truths that Japanese society is still grounded in. For example, in 2022, a female lawmaker in Japan was openly laughed at by her fellow lawmakers when proposing a bill to the Prime Minister about protecting teenage girls in the adult film industry. So you'd expect this anime to be different, especially with the focused lens they had into mental health. But in general, mental health in Japan is still framed mostly as a personal struggle, in which the patient is expected to overcome their issues with will or inner strength. It's not really recognized as a disease. This show, in my opinion, really missed the mark here with its ending. They completely took away all of the factors that gave so much depth to the show, like talking about real-world issues, by not giving any proper solutions to the characters' problems in the end, which is a big shame, since it seemed like they were really going somewhere with the idea of how much grief support groups, whether intentionally or unintentionally made, can help someone, especially adolescents. So to wrap this up, it's pretty apparent by now that the plot of Wonder Egg Priority internally combusted, and with that lost all of its original meaning towards the end. In trying to become more literal with all the sudden in-depth lore and theories, the metaphorical aspect to that show, which made it so beautiful, became all jumbled up. But look, this show still offers a very good lens into trauma and how our interaction with others helps in coping with it. And the show itself did gain attention with its subject matter, art, composition, visual effects, voice acting, and sound design. Though tainted by the ending, it still had an impact, if ever so subtly, on the medium of anime and its role in society. Take for example the stills of specific scenes, like the crushed cockroach in episode 1 being gently held by Ai and given a proper send-off into the afterlife by her. Those stills were simple imagery, but so emotionally charged at the same time. Even though the poorly executed ending only shines a light on the underlying issues present in that show that prevented it from succeeding, it perhaps offers a lens into how in the future another series can avoid its pitfalls. All in all, it resonated with me, countless other people, and probably will with you too if you haven't seen it. Whatever the case, Wonder Egg might have finished, but bubbles of discourse surrounding the series and what it represents have for sure and will continue to erupt in the discussion of impactful Japanese animation. And so, with all that said, we've reached the end of this episode. Thank you for tuning into Anime Huddle with Radio LUMS so far, and do look forward to the next episode. See you next time and goodbye.